After a full offseason of hype, we finally have real games. So week 1 is in the books. Let's get into the panic meter on 5 players that did not live up to expectations in week 1 this year. Starting at the running backs, I'm going to Zach Charbonnet. And it's not that Zach Charbonnet had all this hype coming into the season, but he was a second round pick last season. He looked to be in a complete timeshare with Kenneth Walker, and that was not the case in week 1. It was Kenneth Walker's backfield. So from a panic meter, 8 out of 10. Alarm bells right away, because there wasn't a drumbeat for Zach Charbonnet in the offseason, and now we see why. This was Kenneth Walker's backfield. Outtouched 23-11. Charbonnet does come away with a 30-yard touchdown reception. Maybe that gives him some extra life, but really until the injury, and naturally this is the issue with Kenneth Walker, right? He gets an abdomen injury at the end of the game, and before that, basically, Zach Charbonnet was a true handcuff. This wasn't a split. This was star running back, backup. We expected so much more from Zach Charbonnet as a rookie, and now this new coaching staff has basically come in and said, you're not going to get that opportunity. That is Kenneth Walker's job to take, and he has done nothing but look spectacular in week 1. Efficient on the ground, running hard, making guys miss. He did everything you want to see from, as a star running back. He is jumping up Dynasty rankings right after week 1 because he did everything he needed to do to say, I am actually a star running back. Zach Charbonnet is my backup. The other running back that just really, really disappointed, and I think Addison, this is going to hurt for you, Javonte Williams, just was not good on the ground and did not lead the backfield in opportunity. He was the number 2 back by the end of the game. He starts week 1 as the starter. He is involved early, and he just didn't do much with it, and then game script got away from him. And that's a scary proposition, right? So the fact that Javonte Williams underperformed, game script got away from him, and then he kind of got phased out, I'm at a 6 out of 10 here. I'm not saying it's the end of the world, but it's not what you want to see, because a player that is not game script proof is never a good thing. And it's weird to say he got phased out, because coming into this season, right before Jaleel McLaughlin got drafted last year, he was used in the passing game a ton. But because those opportunities are now going away from him, he gets out-touched or out-opportunityed. I don't know what the word is. 15-10 for Jaleel. So if this becomes a game script thing, I have bad news for Javonte. Denver's going to be down constantly. It's not a good team. It's not a good offense. So that could just be more in the favor of Jaleel, and maybe even Audric Estime comes and starts to take work from Javonte because he averaged under 3 yards a carry. So even with his touches, he wasn't good, right? It's a different story if Javonte's 10 touches, he looks great, and the game just gets away. But he was inefficient. 1 catch for 0 yards. Like I said, 2.8 yards per carry. Another game like this meter's going to jump to a 10, and Javonte just is not going to be the guy we wanted him to be a couple years ago before all the injuries. So right now, keep an eye on it. He's going to the bench in all of my leagues, and the ones I have him at least, and we're just going to monitor that situation closely. We got 1 wide receiver to talk about, and there's plenty of others that we'll talk through over the next couple of weeks, but I want to touch on JSN first. 2 targets, both in the first quarter, finishes the game with an 8% target share. Panic meter, look, I'm not gonna freak out. It's gonna be a 3 out of 10, which I think is fair because look, we're paying attention. We're paying attention to him not doing a lot in his first game. This was a weird game, and they just didn't throw a lot, really. I mean, they just kind of did whatever they wanted on the ground, but there's still a problem here. 8% is never great. I don't care how many passes there are. And on top of it, he was 6th on the team in targets. Out-targeted by DK Metcalf, out-targeted by Tyler Lockett, by Noah Fant, Kenneth Walker. I mean, it did not go the way we expected. And it's disappointing because those 2 targets, they came so early in the game. It felt like, yeah, JSN is involved. He is a part of this offense. And he just sort of got phased out. And that sucks. But he basically was running wind sprints for 3/4 of the game. You can't be excited about that. If this trend continues, right? If next week is a more normal game script and he just isn't used, this jumps up to a 6 out of 10, a 7 out of 10. And the other piece here, if he cannot he cannot out-target Tyler Lockett, that is going to be a massive issue because that was what we were all betting on, right? 32-year-old Tyler Lockett cannot keep doing this. He can't keep getting away with it. But if he does, we may just have to accept early on this year, JSN is not that guy. And maybe that's true. I'm not saying it yet, but we need to monitor it very closely the next 2 to 3 weeks. Sticking with our pass catchers, we have Trey McBride, who just did not meet the expectations in week 1. And because of that, we're at a 0 out of 10 on the panic meter. I do not care at all. It just doesn't matter. The guy had a 29% target share. They didn't connect. That's the extent of what has happened here. Trey McBride is still the 1A, 1B from a pass catching perspective. He is by far the best tight end. It's going to be, a mixture of him, Marvin Harrison Jr., Greg Dortch. Just love seeing that in its own right. But Trey McBride is not a fluke. And that's why I wanted to mention him here, because when you have a guy break out like he did last season, later in the year, I should say, and they don't come out and hit the ground running, we know how people act in fantasy. Like a lot of people will just go out there and say, see, last year was fake. It wasn't the real deal. He was just there because they didn't have outside wide receivers. That's not the case. Trey McBride is good. He's talented. He earns targets at an insane clip. Things are going to be just fine for Trey McBride. I'm still sending, late first round picks, mid first round picks, depending on the league format for Trey McBride without any hesitation whatsoever. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have Deshaun Watson. 53% completion percentage, under 200 yards, 2 interceptions, multiple missed throws, and just it could not have been worse. 10 out of 10. We are terrified if you have Deshaun Watson. He is not a player that is destined to return to form. Look, he was under pressure all day, so that's not necessarily his fault. I think it was 17 pressures on his dropbacks, which is just, you're running for your life. But still, even when he wasn't being pressured, he just missed open throws. He made bad choices. He is not the guy we saw back in 2020 when he was a full-time starter. And keep in mind, since 2020, he has played 13 games. 13 games. He has not thrown for 300 yards since week 17 of 2020. It is insane to think about how dominant and just unbelievable he used to be. And then you look at this version and you say, that's not the same person. But when you only play 13 games and almost 4 seasons, almost 4 years, it's very hard to be an elite athlete and just be good at your job. That's the fact of it. So Deshaun Watson, he's cooked. I don't think you can trade him because I think everybody else collectively thinks cooked. So you're probably holding and just look, you're down with the ship here. There's not much else you can do. If you've held him this long, nobody's buying. It's just not happening. So Deshaun Watson ends our panic meter with a beautiful 10 out of 10. And the Browns should be drafting a quarterback next year.